Lopez wants it away.
And it's hit deep to left center. Andrew Jones on the run. This one has a chance. Home run! Mike Piazza and the Mets lead 3-2. Bartolo has done it! The impossible has happened! This is one of the great moments in the history of baseball.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mets fans of all ages, here is your host, Nick Durst. Hello, Mets fans, and welcome back to another edition of Bleav in the Mets. I'm your host, Nick Durst. Thank you for tuning in on the Bleav platforms or on our awesome YouTube page at Bleav in the Mets. Make sure you subscribe and you never, ever miss an episode. Thanks for all the support so far. We are in the grunt tier of spring training. I've had enough already. The Mets have already sent down the exciting prospects, and now we're just looking at these guys who are going to be in the roster. Nothing overly impressive. I know I've been negative Nick on this show as of late, but I really can't help it. I have low expectations for this season, and you all know that. I'm tired of speaking to myself like I've done the last few episodes here, so I'm going to get some help here. We'll discuss the Mets together. Joining me now, making his big return to the show. You saw him on here once before, but you, of course, maybe see him with the New York Post, SNY, John Jay. He's all over the place. He is Dexter Henry. Dexter, thank you for coming back to the show this season for the Mets. I don't have high expectations.
Yeah.
Curious to hear what your expectations are, because right now, the Mets, if we're looking at FanDuel, their over-under is at 80.5. That went down, I think, a game or two after the Senga injury. I'm looking at this rotation, and I'm not really sure where it's adding up to the Mets being close to 500.
Yeah, I think when it comes to my expectations, right, Nick, it's like before the Senga injury and then after the Senga injury. So before the Senga injury, I was in this place where I was talking to some friends who were Mets fans and just, people around at work and stuff. And I said, look, I think this team is going to be competitive. I think they're going to play really hard. I think they're going to surprise some people. Now, I'm sure Mets, you've heard this and seen this too. There's some Mets fans jumping out the window, 88, 89 wins. I wasn't going that high. I said 83. I could see them a little bit over 500. I could see them competing for that third wild card spot. I thought that was reasonable. Now, here's the problem. Senga gets hurt. He's got the shoulder injury. We have no idea when he's coming back. I think it's a huge blow. Now you're asking me to, and I'm not a big wins guy in terms of determining how good a pitcher is. But what I will say is I believe that Senga was the kind of pitcher, based on what we saw from him last year, and it would be interesting to see what he does in his sophomore season, that, okay, he's a guy that's going to get the Mets some wins. He's going to keep them in a bunch of games. Is he probably a true ace? No, but he could pitch good enough, or who knows, maybe it would have been better. Now we don't know. Clearly, he was the best pitcher in the rotation. He's gone. So if you're taking the best pitcher in the rotation, and let's say best case scenario, Mets fans, Senga's out for the first month of the season. Let's just say that. All right. Let's say I thought he could get them 3 wins in that month, or contribute to keeping them in 4 out of 5 starts or something like that. Now you're getting down to about 79 wins, 78 wins, 77 maybe, right? Which is kind of what I'm going to have to put this team at, because now there could be less, because I don't know. You're asking a lot of this pitching staff. You're asking a lot for the starting pitching rotation that I think there's a ton of question marks. Luis Severino, right? We know Luis Severino can pitch if healthy. He's just never healthy. Everybody else is a question mark. And who do you trust at the back end of this rotation? So pre-Senga injury, Nick, I was at 83 wins. Post this Senga injury, and we have no idea with the rest and when he'll come back, I got to say now I'm thinking like 78 wins for the Mets. So if I was betting on the FanDuel, I'm not inclined to do this. Growing up rooting for the Mets, I'm not inclined to go with the under, but I might have to take the under just because I can't trust what's going on with Senga. Honestly, it was me in terms of the betting. I just stay away. I would stay away from the Mets right now if I was betting the over-under. I would stay away. It's too close because here's the thing. Would it also surprise you in typical Mets fashion, Nick, that you said yourself you've been negative Nick, you've been down on this season? Would it surprise you if they then played over their heads and a little bit better? No, I think what the Mets have going for them is I think the lineup actually is going to be pretty decent. I'm not worried about the lineup, actually. It's the pitching that worries me. I'm actually not even worried about the bullpen, which is rare for the Mets or Mets fans to say. But it's the starting pitching. I don't know if you could trust it right now, but we'll see. We'll see.
Well,
I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just, I'm just saying.
Look at the Mets' last 3 seasons. Their aces, all of them were starting the year, the injury list. Senga, Scherzer, Verlander, and DeGrom. So I don't know if that's something that says something about the Mets' athletic training and whatnot, but I'm not a big bettor. But if I had to bet and be able to bet on anything, sports games, who's fast or whatever, I would bet the under. And I don't think the Mets are going to be able to win over 80 games. I would say they're probably going to be around the 74 win range. And the Cut app would allow me to do that. The Cut app is a peer-to-peer social betting platform that's legal in over 40 states, and it has customizable odds. You could track the capabilities of an entire social network with group chats. If you're betting with your friends, user profiles and rewards, there's all payments. There's no need for Venmo and all that stuff. You just make your money. So if I wanted to, maybe I could bet. There's a 10% welcome bonus right now for anybody listening to the show. Use the promo code Bleav Mets. That's capital BLEAV METS, Bleav Mets, and head on over to the Cut app to do that if you want to bet along on the under for us here with the Mets this season. But when I'm looking at this rotation, I'm really worried about it. Now it's saying, I've heard it before. Oh, we're going to shut him down, cautionary. We've heard it with DeGrom. We heard it with Verlander last year. If Senga's back before June, I'd be surprised. I'd be happy. I think he's going to be out a long term. This is a situation where they're shutting him down. So he's shut down. So he's not going to even be re-examined till towards the end of this month. Let's say everything's great. Then he's got to start throwing again. Then he's got to go to extended spring training. He's going to have to rehab starts. So you're already looking. He's out for April, definitely. I can't see him coming back. And maybe he's back in May. He comes back in May. Maybe he's going to be in an innings limit like he already was. So that's really worrisome for me. Stromanaya, he got a haircut. He looks great. He looks like a different man. But he's coming off a season where he was relegated to the bullpen. He made most of his games out of the bullpen. Luis Severino, self-proclaimed by him worst pitcher in baseball last year. Awful ERA. Adrian Hauser, he's like an okay depth piece, but he's going to be in the midst of the rotation. Jose Quintana, who I think is above average pitcher. I think he's good, but he was hurt last year, so who knows there. And then you're looking around at Tyler McGill, who I like, but he wasn't great last year. Joey Lucchesi, Jose Budo, a lot of question marks for me there. So I don't know how this is going to shake out. I think the pitching, it worries me. And it's great to have Edwin Diaz back, Dexter, but how often is he going to be getting the ball with the lead? Because I don't see these pitchers going beyond 5 innings. And then they signed a bunch of relievers, which I guess is good, but all these guys are coming off career worst seasons as far as ERAs is concerned. Fujinama, like he throws 101, that's great, but he had a 7 ERA, he walks everybody. Tonkin had a high ERA. Lopez had a high ERA off his worst year. So the pitching trend, and I sound like, a broken record here on the show, like I usually do, but all the pitchers they brought in, literally, statistically wise, had their worst ERAs of their careers last season. So I don't know. David Stearns, apparently he's built great, pitching stats and bullpen before. We'll say, I just don't think this is a season where they're actually going to be going for it. I am interested to see what kind of shakes out here. I talked about in the last episode. I think this season really is going to come down to the prospects they have in the system and how quickly they're going to get to the majors, if they're going to get there this season and make an impact. So the main prospect that I talked about last week that I actually think could be a linchpin as to whether the Mets go with one way or the other, I think it's going to be Drew Gilbert. And if they call him up, because chances are between Marte, Nimmo, and Bader, one of them is going to be hurt before middle of May. So it's like, are you going to move McNeil to the outfield and play Joey Wendell every day? Are you going to have Taylor, who's a career 220 hitter, play every day? Or are you going to say, screw it, Drew Gilbert, he's raking in AAA, let's bring him up? Or are you going to say, well, last year, the same thing, different regime, but they left Marty Mauricio down in the minors till August. It was too little too late. But if Drew Gilbert, he comes up, Dexter, and he plays like a Corbin Carroll from last year with Diamondbacks, that's a difference maker for the team. But he's the prospect I have my eye on for this season. And I like Clifford in the long run for his power. But are there any prospects that you think could potentially be in Queens before the summer ends?
Yeah, see, I thought Gilbert seems like the most likely guy. The other guy I would say to watch because let's see how he pitches and where he starts, right? And this is on the pitching side because this is where the Mets really need a lot of help. But Christian Scott, who moved up pretty quickly, pitching through 3 different stops last year in terms of the minor leagues, moved up pretty quick. He pitched to a good ERA. I think his ERA was about 2.57 across all his stops. Right now, was in just over 87 2/3 innings, and he had 107 strikeouts. So he pitched pretty well. Now, can he make that jump to AAA, or there's the automated strike zone? How does he pitch there? And then see. And then it also depends on all the other stuff we're talking about, Nick, which is, all right, well, what are these other pitchers doing here? And if the Mets are struggling, this is something I really find interesting. Let's say the pitching struggles, which we're not confident in. And I don't know, July, Mets are not in it. They're out of it, there'll be a lot of questions around them then. Maybe they're selling some pieces. Maybe that's the time to bring up a pitcher like him. Not a lot of pressure. Let him learn to pitch in the majors for the rest of the season and see what you got going forward. So I think it could be a good year if the Mets get one position player up that comes to help them and maybe one pitcher. I know the pitching is a little bit more far off for people. And then you've got the guys like, Jett Williams and Luisangel, Acuña, who they look like very exciting prospects, but they're being blocked at other positions right now.
Yeah, they're both shortstops, so they're
both
blocking each other,
right.
and they're blocked by Lindor.
Right, and they're blocked by Lindor. So what do you do with that? Do those guys get outfield reps this year? That's something to keep an eye on because that's where the Mets are going to need help. But then we just talked about Gilbert, so like that's part of the problem there. I would say Gilbert seems like most likely and probably most close to Major League ready, but keep your eye on Williams and Acuña and what they do and how they hit and if they can force some things to happen. And that's what's really going to be interesting because the Mets, there's a lot of young names you can talk about. Obviously Mauricio's hurt, but what happens when he comes back? Also got to keep your eye on the young players they do have up here. What's up with Brett Beatty? Does he finally take the job? There's so many questions. I think the team is primed to have a good infusion of youth with veterans right now. But the thing is, the Mets need something that they haven't had in a long time, a really long time. Probably, you really think about it, since Reyes and Wright. They need a couple of guys to come up and just hit and play good. And you to say, oh, yeah, they're here. This is the future. The future's here. We see it. We're here. I think what's frustrating for Mets fans, Nick, is you see this happen all the time with the Braves. They bring these guys up. They hit, they contribute, they play well, and then they lock them to some long-term deals. They lock them up early. That never seems to go for the Mets. I know this is getting long-winded here, but I'm trusting a little bit in Stearns. You were talking about the bullpen, Nick. You were talking about the rotation. The one thing Stearns has done here is he's got a lot of guys that have something to prove. I sometimes like that on a team. A lot of people with a lot to prove. A lot of people needing bounce back years, wanting to get longer term contracts. Sometimes that works out really well. Sometimes that doesn't, in certain sports because guys are looking for themselves. But there are a lot of guys that need to bounce back here. And I wonder if that's part of Stearns' thinking that a lot of guys will be motivated to play for each other and perform well themselves. So that could bode well for the Mets. And then that's how you sometimes get over teams that overachieve. And if the Mets overachieve, it's going to be because their pitching, in my opinion, overachieved or did a lot better than we expected them to, or somebody like a Luis Severino or Quintana steps up in a major way and pitches above their pay grade, for lack of a better term. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, for me with the pitching, I think the way Stearns maneuvered this is basically everybody's on a one-year deal. So that for him gives him flexibility at the trade deadline. Because I think if the Mets are like within 4 or 5 games of playoffs at the wild card, I think they're going to stand pat. I don't think they're going to make any acquisitions. They don't want to get anybody up. But I think more likely they're going to be out of it. I think they're going to make some trades. So if you could flip Luis Severino for a desperate team for a reliever for the future, or Stroman, maybe somebody wants him as a reliever, a lefty out of the pen, and you can get somebody for them, that's a plus, because all you did is you paid money for them and you could trade them out. But
some Mets fans are going to be happy with what you just said. I don't think it's bad strategy, Nick, right? Like if the season goes that way, some people are going to say, well, the Mets punted on this season. And they're not going to come out and say that, but maybe to some degree they are. But I also don't think it's necessarily bad strategy. I think they're looking to have guys that are motivated, trying to field a somewhat competitive team. And if it goes right, great. If it doesn't, like you said, they have pieces to sell. That's not bad heading into a free agency in 2024, late 2024, 2025. That's expected to be much better than this year. So
right.
I don't think it's the worst strategy. I think Stearns knows how to find value. And I think that's what he's looking to do. I think there'll be a time for the Mets to go all in. If the Mets are a middling team this year, but for me, I think what I'd be looking for more if I was a Mets fan is the Mets are a middling team this year. If they're just kind of outside the last wild card spot, they don't make it. But you see development from young players. If you see a young player come up like a Gilbert and excites you, if you see Brett Brady hold it down at third base, right? If you see Francisco Alvarez take another jump at catcher, and you see some of those things, and you see the youth coming, then I think you'll be fine with it. And other thing I think you'd like to see is Kodai Senga come back healthy and pitch like he did last year, or pitch even better. If all those things happen, those are a lot of ifs. I think those are the most important things happening to the Mets season. Anything else? Look, if you get something great out of Severino, amazing. Quintana, amazing. Manea, amazing. I wouldn't bank on it, but I think but I think it's more for me about
a time where you had a rotation where 4 of the starters are on 1-year deals. So that's Quintana, Severino, Hauser, and Manea. They're all 1-year deals. So next off season should be a good pitching off season. Like Walker Buehler is there, Corbin Burns. Zach Wheeler just got scooped up, extended big time for the Phillies. So that's rough if you're a Mets fan, hoping to have him back. But it's going to be interesting to see that off season. But the trade deadline here, I'm wondering, Dexter, Alonso here. I think David Stearns has no ties to him, obviously. I think it would be a monumental mistake, especially PR-wise and ticket sales-wise, to trade him during the season. If he's got the guts to do it, and he's really going to flex his muscle of, hey, this is my team. I'm going to build the way I want. But if you trade Alonso, I'm sure if the Mets are out of it, a lot of teams are going to want Alonso. This is a guy who's probably going to be right there leading the league in home runs, right up there in RBI. I don't know what kind of package you get for him, but you're not going to be able to replace in the future 50 home runs and 130 RBI anyhow. So it's dicey there, but if I was leaning right now, I'm not going to give another cut ad here, Reed, but I would lean towards the fact, I think it's like 60-40. I think 60% likely that David Stearns is going to trade Pete Alonso at the trade deadline. How you feeling about that?
I think that if you're a Mets fan, I was always concerned when they didn't extend him before last season, right? I thought it was something the Mets should have done. You make good points about David Stearns has no ties to Pete Alonso. They didn't draft him. He has no ties. He's going to want to do what's best for the team, and I trust that. Here's the thing. When you're in his position, you got to do what's best for the team. You got to build the team in the way you want for the future going forward. Fans love Pete because it kind of ties to what I've said before. And I should have mentioned him. I said, they haven't had somebody come up and produce really quickly and hit in a good way since Wright and Reyes. Alonso did that. He's that guy. Now, has he ever hit for average the way I think Mets fans and most people thought he would to his talent? No. And he's become a, low average, struck out a lot last year. Although I think a lot of that had to do with after he got hit by the pitch and he got injured and he rushed back and he just wasn't the same, right? I think someone like Stearns is looking at his numbers and saying, is this the kind of first baseman I want with this team long term? Stearns strikes me as a guy, and I'm actually kind of this guy too in terms of building a baseball team. I like a first baseman with power that probably hits for a bit better in terms of average. I also want, I want that OPS to be up a little bit as well too. So I wonder with that, there's a couple of things. It's very layered with the Pete stuff when I talk about it. It's so layered because it's hard to not talk about the Boris angle of this too, right? Pete doesn't get his extension, signs with Boris. We all all seeing right now as baseball fans what happens when you sign with Scott Boris. Now, the times have changed. Scott Boris usually gets his client paid, Nick. Usually. Yeah. I think it depends on what
offseason.
Not this offseason, right? And I think that says a lot about the market and how things are changing. And I wonder how Pete feels about that. So whatever number he thinks. But, I'm going to throw a question back to you, Nick. I'm not avoiding your question, but I'm just curious for what you say. Because whenever I talk this with Mets fans, I'm curious. What number do you think the Mets should sign Pete Alonso at? Like, what's the number you're fine with that you think is fair for Pete Alonso and fair for the Mets per year?
I think he should be right there with Matt Olson's contract because he's got the most home runs of any player in baseball since he entered the league. So I think you got to start with at minimum $30 million a year. That would be the starting point, I would say. So if you want to go 10 years, $300 million to get things started, I think that would work.
And I think that's the problem for Stearns. I think he's going to be like, Matt Olson doesn't hit as many homers, but he hits for a better average. He's, gets on base a little bit better. I had to double check that. I could be wrong on that, guys. I think he gets his on base percentage a little bit better. So he's saying that maybe I could find better value. The thing with stuff like this is when you make that move and that decision, and I'm sure Mets fans listening might tie this back to like how they felt about Reyes when he left, and the Mets didn't sign him. You better be right. You better be right on it, right? You got to be right on when you make a move like this. I'm not saying do everything for the fans. I tend to be with you and your odds on this. I lean to it more, I think, especially if the Mets are not in it come the trade deadline. I do not think Stearns will hesitate. I know nothing of this. I have no inside information. I haven't talked to anybody in the Mets, but I don't think Stearns will hesitate to trade Alonso. Now, here's the thing, Mets fans. Is that necessarily the worst thing for this team? I might be inclined to say it isn't. And there is a world where this can happen. I know why he wants to think about it. There's a world where he could trade him and the Mets could still re-sign him as a free agent. That could happen. What if that's the best thing for the team? Alonso goes someplace else, plays for a couple months. The Mets try to bring him back in free agency at their number. And they also got some assets for the farm system, which is what the Mets have really been trying to do as they look to compete long term. The Mets do have a lot of issues in terms of the farm system that needs to be replenished and restocked. And so if this is the way Stearns feels that he could do it, and that might be the best opportunity for them to do it, I can't really knock him for it. I know fans will be disappointed if he's gone, but do you trust the guys running the ship or not? I just think Mets fans have a lot of PTSD from the Wilpon years and the way the team was run under previous regimes. I think this regime is different. I really do. And the reason I believe that is look at the way they approach this offseason. I think Stearns, whether you like it or not, you don't like they didn't spend money. I think he approached this offseason smartly. He got guys on one-year deals, guys that could be motivated. I'm not saying that made him a good team, but he understands value. He's not going to throw a lot into a market that's not good. They went all in for Yamamoto. They tried as best as they could, and I thought that was a guy you go all in for. But unfortunately, he went to the Dodgers. But you don't go all in for it. No offense to the Blake Snells and the Jordan Montgomerys of the world. I think they're making smart business moves, and that tells me Stearns is going to make the move that he thinks is best for the team. If the best move for the team is trading Pete Alonso and the team is out of it and replenishing the farm system, I think he's going to do it. It
would be a tough day to be a Mets fan if Pete Alonso
was
traded. He's on a Hall of Fame path. Number would be retired. He'd go down as the best Met offensively of all time if he stays. And I think if he's traded, I think there'd be bad blood there, and he would not even consider coming back because he'd be so hurt. Also, gotta wonder, if the Mets are bad this year, like is Alonso going to really want to be back? Like, are the Mets going to be good next year? How's Carlos Mendoza going to manage? We'll see how that all shakes out. But next off season is going to be a crucial one for the Mets. Right now, obviously, they're trying to jump under that Steve Cohen luxury tax, and this ties in with Pete Alonso. But Buster only reporting he's at Mets at spring training recently said the Mets plan to go after Juan Soto the next off season. Well, that makes sense, but we heard the same report from him and others last year about Ohtani this offseason. They didn't. And 2 years ago about Aaron Judge, and they didn't. So here's the thing. Juan Soto, would he be great to sign? Yes. Do I know if he's built for New York? I don't know, because I'll tell you this, Dexter. Last year, he was batting 220 in April and May on San Diego. Yep. This year, if he's batting 220 in the Bronx, the Yankee fans will be booing him. So I don't know how it's going to handle with him. I think ultimately Soto is going to be all about the money, and the Mets should have a lot of money to offer him. But look what just happened with the Yamamoto deal. The Mets, the Steve Cohen effect, the Mets get played to drive the price, and then the player goes and picks a team that actually is going to compete. I don't see what Juan Soto is thinking, looking at this Mets roster and saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to come to the Mets and we'll win a World Series now. Because I don't know if they're there. Obviously, there's got to be a lot of other signings going around. If they trade Alonso, that's probably an indicator of where they're going in the future. But I don't know. Can they get Alonso signed long term and bring in Juan Soto? I think that would be a lot of money. That'd be more attractive for Juan Soto to be there. Alonso. He's not going to come and let me play with Lindor and Jeff McNeil. Like, I don't know. Like, the Mets need a lot of work next offseason. If you can get Juan Soto, great. That's just going to be a lot of money. And I don't know, Dexter. You think Juan Soto would consider playing for the Mets if all things are relatively similar with the pricing on the contract? Because I wouldn't be surprised if the Dodgers go after him next offseason.
No, not
so
surprised with the Dodgers.
It could be the same thing again.
Nothing will surprise me with the Dodgers and what they're willing to spend. So nothing will surprise me there. Here's the thing for the Mets. The point you're making, it's why it matters what kind of season they have, right? Yes. Like there's nuance to all this stuff. I agree with you. Right now, as the Mets are constructed and the feelings going into the season, I do not think it's highly attractive for a Juan Soto if I was him. I'm just trying to think if I was him. But if the Mets even have the season that I said that I thought they could have before the Kodai Senga injury, if they were 83-win team and scrappy, and maybe they're just outside or they sneak into the third wildcard spot, and he talks to ownership and they say, hey, Steve Cohen sits him down and says, hey, man, I want the faces of this team to be you, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso. We got some young guys in Alvarez, Beatty that we liked because they had good seasons, and they're part of the course. You got young guys with you. Our farm system is getting restocked and replenished. We got some guys coming on the way. You can be the star in the outfield that we need. He could look at that and say, okay, how scrappy they are, how they play this year. It's almost why the Mets don't have to have a great year, but to me, it's more about having a good, it's like, we say this more in basketball, but it's like showing. Yeah, a nice little showing that the culture is good, that is strong, that they're building something there, something that guys like Alonso, if he's still here, or Lindor can go out and recruit on. If you're coming to play with an Alonso and a Lindor, the thing is you're spending a lot of money, 2 guys in the infield, 1 in your outfield.
Right. And like I said, 4 free agent starting pitchers. So you're going to have to sign at least 2-3 pitchers or trade for them.
That's the problem, right? You're spending a lot of money there on position players. Where's your money in your pitchers? And then where's the pitching prospects coming up that I should believe in? Yeah. And that's what, if I was Juan Soto, I'm asking, all right, well, who am I trusting on his pitching staff? Now, there's so much more between now and then. I think the Mets the next offseason, the reason Buster Olney's report, like the way I think they're going, I think they're more likely to invest more in pitching next offseason than anything else. Like if they're going to put their money, it's going to be towards pitching. And we just talked about a lot of the young position players and going to try to say, all right, maybe we get Gilbert in the outfield. So maybe Acuña is the outfield, right, one of our outfielders of the future.
And eventually they're going to have to trade some of these guys because, you you got Jett Williams, you got Acuña, they're shortstops, right? So maybe I think Mauricio is going to be a big player when he comes back next year. I'm sad he's out. But, between Williams and and Acuña, one of them will move to second base, right? You still got Jeff McNeil. So maybe Jeff McNeil moves to the outfield, one moves to the outfield. But you got Nimmo here long term. You got Gilbert. You got Clifford. There's more players than there are positions. So eventually you should take some of these pieces and flip them for starting pitching. And that way you could save money free agency wise. But Juan Soto, Dexter, what do you think of this contract is going to be? I think he's going to be asking for 13 years, $500 million.
I hate any contract over like 8 years. I hate them. I personally, it's not my money.
Yeah, that would take him through the age 39 season, I think.
I hate those contracts. Like if it was me,
I hate the Lindor deal. I think that was too long.
Except they have there's times I think you have to do it, right? Like the Mets at that time. I know you're like, but the Mets at that time, they needed a star. Like I loved when they traded for him. I want him here. And it was like, well, what are you going to do? I don't think you have to do this with Soto, right? I don't think you have to do this. And like, I don't know why these teams are still giving out these. None of these deals over 8 years work out great. Show me one. None of them do. None of them do. They don't. What you'd want in those deals is, could you get team opt-outs in like the last 3 or something? Then I'd feel differently about it, right? Like, but the player's never going to sign for that, and I don't blame him either. What's he going to get?
I think him and Boris are thinking at least $500 million.
I think definitely 500 because he's not Ohtani, right? Because he's
only a hitter.
He's just a hitter, so he doesn't have the value Ohtani has.
And from what I don't see it every day, but apparently what I've been hearing on the radio since he's come to New York is that he's not the best defensively. So, like, remember a few years ago, Bryce Harper, he signed that crazy 13-year deal. Mm-hmm. But that guy, I mean, so far it's been a great contract for the Phillies, but he's great defensively. So, I mean, I think that ended up, and that changed the culture. So the Mets need a signing that's going to change the culture and say, we are here to win. We're here for good now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I'm like, I felt like Lindor was kind of that dude for them. Although Juan Soto is a much more talented.
Also, they brought in Lindor. They had a good season, and they've had some really 2-3 bad seasons. Lindor trade, it happened. Hindsight, they probably would have been better off not doing the trade because Andres Jimenez has become the best second baseman in the AL. And then that offseason, before they extended Lindor, they could have signed Lindor. They could have signed Corey. You're still right. So it's always that catch-22 of like, should we trade for him and then extend them, or should we just wait till free agency? And I think the Mets, if they wanted to, I think they could have gotten Juan Soto this offseason in a trade, because the key thing is the Mets have the money, so they could eat the contract. They could take on the bad contracts and not give up as much. So I'm interested to see at the trade deadline, actually, with the Mets. Going back to that, if they are out of it, are they still going to be looking to acquire some pieces? Like if there's a team that's like, we have a guy who is going to be a free agent after next year, like the Tampa Bay Rays, they always do this. They're looking 18 months ahead. And they're like, well, we'll take him, and we'll also take one of your bad contracts back in order to get the good prospects or whatever, or to get the good player. That's what I'm interested to seeing. So, but this year is going to be a really up and down season.
It's going to be interesting. Maybe they'll surprise us. It's going to be interesting. Listen, if they're, I think what Mets fans have to root for is them to be competitive and stay in the race as long as they can. Because I think if that happens, it bodes much better for the Mets fan and their ability to build this team going forward. Sorry, I was knocked over my tea. The ability for this team to move forward and really build the team. I think that as they move forward, the chances that they have to either sell off players if they need to, or show that the culture of winning is strong. You also got to remember this is first-year manager. How do things work with that? There's a lot of question marks around the Mets, and I get it. We don't like the question marks. People want the known commodities.
Like I always say, I want the Mets to win now and win later, but it's not happening.
Yeah,
I think it was a bad first impression for David Stearns to, before he gets hired, fire Buck Showalter because he knows he's getting Craig Counsell, and then he's like, we'll take the bench coach of the Yankees, who literally had the worst record in their last 30 years. I don't get the hire, but that was a clear indicator that Mendoza's not here to win right now. He's here to develop, and he's going to grow as the Mets grow. So that's where they're at for this season.
That's a fair point. Was not crazy about the Buck firing. I thought Buck had instilled a good culture, despite how you may feel about last year with the Mets. I hated the notion that Buck couldn't manage or he somehow forgot to manage all of a sudden. I thought that was nonsense.
Well, when you're trading away 3 of your best players,
what are you going to do?
Everybody's hurt. What are you going to do?
Right.
How much can you get out of like Jonathan Arise, who was like a career minor leaguer, who was playing third base?
Right. He did Buck didn't just forget how to manage. Now, where I did praise the Mets, and I've talked about this before, I did praise him for when last year was clearly over. The older pitchers in Scherzer and Verlander didn't have it. Yeah. I gave them a ton of credit for saying this is a sunk cost. Let's get off of this. Let's trade these and let's rebuild the farm system. I thought that was the right move. I think the Mets are building in the right way. I think the worst thing they could have done was like stay with this team. Let's run it back another time. I think they're doing things in the right way. I trust Cohen. I'm going to trust that he has the right people in there. Maybe it is about development, Nick. Maybe it is. But maybe that's not a bad thing. That's all I'm saying. I think it's hard to win now and also at the same time win in the future unless you're the Dodgers. But how did the Dodgers do that? Ability to open up the checkbook, also very strong farm system.
Right.
You have to have those two things.
And the Dodgers, with all their glitz and glamour the last 2 years, they haven't won in the playoffs.
Right. They haven't won in the playoffs. And that's the thing too. Doesn't guarantee winning. But hey, you got a chance and you got to build a good culture, and hopefully the Mets are on their way to doing that.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Dexter's has been great. Let everybody know where they can find you on social media.
Everybody can find me on social media at DHenryTV and all social media platforms. Also check me out on the SNY and New York Post Sports YouTube channels. Nick, always a pleasure to come on here and talk some Mets baseball with you.
Yeah, absolutely great to have you on. Make sure you're following Bleav in the Mets on all social media platforms on YouTube at BLEAVINTHEMETS. I'm on X at Nick_Durst, and I am on Instagram at Nick's Food and Stuff. And until next time, everybody, let's hope for the best and let's go Mets.